Good morning, everyone. My name is Yaobi Tohu. I'm from ICANN, Internet Corporation for ASCII Names and Numbers. I'm the Director of Stakeholder Engagement and Operation for Africa. We welcome you to this workshop scheduled for 90 minutes. And we'll be talking about universal acceptance of domain names and email addresses. We hope that at the end of this workshop, you'll get the maximum understanding of these two topics, internationalized domain names, and also you should be able to help ICANN organize a committee to make people, systems ready, or people informed about the need to make the system universal acceptance compliant. So for the presentation, we have Mr. Samad Hussain, who is Senior Director for International Domain Names and Universal Acceptance Program at ICANN. We have interpretation in French, and then he will try to make it in a way that everyone can speak his language to answer questions. And we are expecting this session to be as interactive as possible. So Samad, I'll hand over to you to start the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Yahweh, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about internationalized domain names and universal acceptance. I will take you through the presentation. The aim of the presentation is to introduce to you not just the context, but also some technical details of both internationalized domain names and the universal acceptance challenge, and to see how we can collectively address the universal acceptance issues which we generally face around us. So let's get started. Just a bit of an introduction. We are all, of course, very familiar with what a domain name is. Normally, the domain names we are used to are in what is called the American Standard Code for Information Interchange, or ASCII format. As you can see, that a normal domain name is normally divided into multiple labels. We have the top level label, which we're all very familiar with, the likes of .com, .org, .net. Then we have the second level label and the third level label, and so on. And the complete domain name is formed using these labels. Interestingly, the rules which govern these labels are slightly different for top level versus the other labels, second level and third level, and so on. And I've shown a summary of how they differ. So if you look at the second level labels, which are, I guess, more liberal in nature, you'll see that they're formed by letters A through Z, uppercase or lowercase, digits 0 through 9, and hyphen. There are obviously conditions on each of the labels that they cannot be more than 63 characters long. And then there are some other restraints, for example, on whether you can start a label with a hyphen or not. And with those rules, one can freely form labels at the second level or third level. For the top level, in RFC 1123, there is a requirement that top level labels have to be alphabetic in nature, which means that they cannot contain digits or hyphen. They only normally contain just the letters A through Z. And of course, the same length requirement also applies to them. So if you look at the ASCII chart, what you will see is that even though ASCII chart allows for many more characters or symbols, as you can see, you have punctuation marks, you have arithmetic symbols, and many more things. But even for the second level domain names, the labels which are allowed take a subset of these characters to formulate a correct domain name. And as we saw, that for the top level domain, even the digits and hyphen are not allowed, and it's limited to just the character set. When because of community input and technical community work, now it's possible to have domain names in local languages as well. So this is an example of a domain name in Tibetan script. Like other domain names, these are also divided into top level domain labels, second level domain labels, and so on. Since ASCII standard is only limited to or only contains letters A through Z, since we wanted to go and represent all the language, all the letters in all the different scripts of the world, basically for doing or implementing internationalized domain names, that's what they're called, the base standard was changed from ASCII to Unicode. So now the internationalized domain names are represented in Unicode for the application layer or for the user layer, so that people can see or use the characters in their own languages and scripts. On the other hand, at the back end, the internet system, the domain name system still obviously supports ASCII. So what was developed was actually a two-part system where a domain name can actually be represented in the form of the end user or script of the end user, which is normally referred to as a U label, which is in using Unicode. And then that eventually, when it has to be resolved or processed, gets converted internally into an equivalent A label or ASCII version, which is normally referred to as an A label. So internationalized domain names were thus formed through initially the IDNA 2003 standard, which is now updated, and now the current version of this standard is called IDNA, or Internationalized Domain Names and Applications 2008. So that is the applicable standard. And what IDNA does is basically looks at all the different possible code points in all the different languages and scripts in Unicode, and then tells us which ones to use. So if you recall, even in ASCII, even though there were many different possible characters, domain names are only allowed to be formed with just the letters and digits and hyphen, and we can't use punctuation marks or other symbols. So same rules were applied to forming domain names in other scripts as well. So this is a example of the code chart of Arabic script from Unicode. We have other scripts and languages. This is Ethiopic, and so we have Chinese, Devanagari. So all these scripts actually have all the different kinds of characters. And I guess one of the questions which one comes forward with is that in ASCII, out of the 127 characters which are possible, only 63 were allowed for domain names. And the question is that, so if you look at Unicode 11.0 version, it covers 148 scripts and total of 137,000 characters or more than 137,000 characters. So of course, the question is which scripts can we support, and which of those characters should be allowed in domain names. And as I said, basically, IDNA 2008 standard defines that requirement, and it in a way only allows things which are letters, digit, and in some scripts they have combining marks, which for example, some scripts encode vowels which are part of the language. So it also allows for combining marks in the as a baseline standard. In addition, there is another problem which needs to be solved.
If I may,
yeah.
Just to inform the participant that please, if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand and I'll let Samad know. But I have a question that will help us before you move. You were talking about a script. You were talking about language. I know within the participant, we may see people from Ghana. I know we speak away from in Ghana. We speak Yoruba in Nigeria. We speak Swahili in other countries. So my understanding is that they are languages. So can you, where do they fit when you talk about a script? Because you talk about script and language.
Yeah.
So my question is that if you can just talk about these two items. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So that's a good question. And let me take a couple of examples. So the way Unicode works is that it is actually encoding scripts, characters in a script and not characters in a language. And what then each language has to do is pick up its own subset of characters which it wants to use. Just to give you an example, Arabic script is used to write many different languages. So for example, Arabic script is used to write the Arabic language, which is obviously popular in North Africa, Middle East area regions. There are many other languages which are written in Arabic script. So for example, Persian in Iran, Persian language uses Arabic script. Urdu language in India and Pakistan also are written in basically the Arabic script. Similarly, for example, Chinese script is or Han script, actually, as it is called, is used to write Chinese, but it is also used in Japanese. So we have each language, when it's being written, it actually chooses a script. In Africa, for example, many of the local languages are written sometimes in Arabic script, sometimes in Latin script. Latin script is the same as what is used to write English. But like in Europe and also Africa, the Latin script is extended with marks and additional characters to write local languages. So many of the languages in Africa, for example, are using extended ASCII or what is called a Latin script. Similarly, there are some other native scripts which are used in Africa. So there is, for example, Tifina, which is used in areas in the west of northwest of Africa. There's also Anko script, which is used in Africa, and Y. So there are other scripts which are actually used in Africa. So and then there are local languages which use those scripts to write these languages. So that's sort of a difference between languages and scripts.
Thank you so much.
When we are encoding, we are encoding for scripts. We're not encoding for languages. But when obviously an end user or registrant is registering for a basically domain name, they may be looking at it from the perspective of their own language. But please do note that the domain names are not necessarily based on language. So if you think about it, .com, for example, is a label, and it doesn't correspond to any word in any language. It's just a label. It's a mnemonic which is used for us to remember a domain name versus an IP address, which is of course a little hard to do. So again, coming back to this discussion, one of the challenges, of course, was that when we came to domain names, we needed to figure out how to choose which characters to allow for all these different scripts which are encoded in Unicode. And of course, the choice was based on, that decision had to be made. Another problem which had to be resolved was that sometimes using different scripts or the same script, you can get two different strings, technically distinct strings, which are indistinguishable. And I present a couple of strings to you on the screen. And as you can probably see that there is no difference, they're exactly the same. Even though they are visually identical, if you look at the Unicodes, they are totally distinct because one is written in Latin script and the other one is written in Cyrillic script. Cyrillic script is used to write languages like Russian. And so there are sometimes cross-script similarities. There are also sometimes within script similarities. And you don't want these two domain names, for example, labels, to be registered or allocated to different people. Otherwise, this can create potentially end-user security issues. So another problem or another challenge when doing internationalized domain name was to identify whether there are such cases where domain names are same, and if they are, then what are those cases, and we need to identify them and then manage them through what we call in-script or cross-script variants. And we eventually found out that these variants exist in many different languages, and they don't need to be necessarily visually identical. Sometimes visually different characters are also considered same by a script community. And the example is Chinese, where Chinese is written in two writing systems, simplified Chinese and the traditional Chinese form. But the Chinese readers consider both of them as the same, even though they're visually distinct, because they mean the same thing for them. So for them, those are also considered variants characters. So the first problem to solve was which characters to allow in domain names. And then if the second problem to solve was, of course, if any of those characters should be considered same or variants of each other. The process started back in 2013 for ICANN, and we start looking at solving these two problems to eventually implement top-level domains, and also, of course, second-level domains, provide support for second-level domains for the registries. And of course, ICANN doesn't have expertise in all these areas and all these scripts. So the mechanism which the community advised us to support was that we create these panels for each scripts. And each panel has expertise, has members of people from who use the script, so they have expertise of the script, and they devise the solution and tell ICANN on how to use these scripts for domain names. And that work's now continued and it's almost finalized. We have a few script panels which are now finalizing their work. Most of them have already completed their work. And now we already have what we call the label generation rules for the root zone. We also have reference label generation rules for the second level and so on, which we are making available to the community so that they can create or use domain names securely. So just to give you
a question, Samad. You
Yep.
mentioned a generation panel for various scripts, and you said that in Africa, for example, many languages, some are using the Arabic script, some are using the Latin script as an example. So in these panels, if you consider, for example, the Arabic generation panel and the Latin script generation panel, do we have some people from Africa participation in this panel, or is it something for ICANN staff only? Thank you.
So these panels are mostly, not mostly, but they're entirely composed of community members. ICANN staff is only supporting the process, but the work is done by the community. For the Arabic, we did have people from Africa, mostly North Africa, but we also looked at, we also had experts who had expertise in use of um, basically Arabic script in other by other African languages beyond Arabic language. Um, so we actually did have expertise. So we, for example, looked at how Arabic script is used in Fula and some other languages as well. So that work obviously is completed, but in any case, the way this process is set up is that the solution has been provided. But if a particular language community or script community feels that there needs to be some addition because something was missed or something, languages also change over time, so some things evolved, they can always start a panel and update the solution. So it's not something which is, I guess, set in stone. One can always update it over time as required. Latin generation panels is also looking at languages which use Latin script in Africa. We don't have any active members. We have had invited, and there are some members from Africa in the Latin panel. That work's still continuing, but there are no active members from Africa. But again, African languages were considered, and they're part of the solution. Again, I think very soon the Latin panel is aiming to close their work within next few weeks. And at that time, we will be releasing this solution they proposed for public comment. So that would be another opportunity for everyone here in Africa to see whether, I guess, the solution which is being proposed appropriately covers the different languages which use Latin script in Africa. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, so then let's move on. So just to conclude then, the works, as I said, almost finalized out of the 28 scripts we had identified as a start, which we want to encode. And these scripts cover most of the languages which are generally written and spoken around the world. 20 have actually been finalized, and another six are almost done. And so far, from the 137,000 characters which were possible in Unicode, encoded in Unicode, IDNA 2008 already shortlisted around 100,000. And based on this community work, they've only suggested 21,000 out of these 137,000 characters, which should be supported for labels in the root zone. And on the right, you can see a solution which, for example, was provided by the Arabic script community. The reason for this conservativeness is to make sure that we only allow characters which are stable and which do not cause any stability problems. And there is a whole set of literature on sort of the guidelines on how the panels should be doing that work. And we can, if anybody's interested, we can share more, I guess, literature on that. So that's sort of a summary. And obviously what has happened is that ICANN has been supporting the community to now allow top-level domains, both country codes and generic, to be used, to be delegated. There are many different countries and territories which have requested their own top-level domains in their own local scripts, and you can see that there are already 62 strings or top-level domains which have been successfully evaluated for CCTLDs. Similarly, in the previous new GTLD round, there were 93 IDN GTLDs, with many more IDN GTLDs which were applied, and 93 of those have actually been delegated, and they're working in all the different scripts globally. All right, so we actually have a small quiz, which let's see if you can help answer this question, just to see if you're understanding this. And obviously, if you're not, I'm more than happy to repeat some of the things which have been shared. So a question to all of you is that Unicode character is as we've discussed, categorized as a letter, digit, mark, punctuation, or a symbol. which of these are do you think are generally used um, for internationalized domain names? Are only letters allowed for IDNs, letters or digits, letter, digits and marks, or letter, digits and symbols, or all categories of characters? And you can type your answer in the chat if you would like to answer this question.
Or you just ask the number.
Yep.
I think we have 5 proposal, and you just type the number. Or you raise your hand if you want to talk. You can have the microphone. Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay, so um, uh, if you think about it, the answer would actually depend on which level of domain names you are talking about. For top level domains,
So, but we got letters and digits 2.
Yeah.
So a response is 2.
Yeah.
So in the chat.
Right. So thank you, Liana. So as so for so if you all remember, for ASCII we allow letters and digits and hyphen, right? In the case of the different scripts, what is normally suggested by the IDNA 2008 standard is that we allow letters and digits, yes, but also marks. If you remember, I was sharing that sometimes combining marks are used to, even in Latin, for example, if you have to write accents on top of letters, sometimes you would need to use a mark like there are different kind of accents which are used to enumerate the basic core base forms of the letters. So the correct answer is number 3, which is letters and digits and also marks, which are allowed for domain names, but symbols are not allowed, for example. So if one popular set of symbols um, is emojis. So if you Unicode obviously also includes emojis. Emojis are characterized as symbols in Unicode, and since symbols are not allowed, emojis are not also allowed in domain names. So moving on. So now let's talk about, so that sets up sort of a baseline for us to understand what are the domain names. So now let's look at universal acceptance of domain names and email addresses and try to understand what this challenge is, where we are in this challenge and how to solve it. So eventually the goal, of course, is that we now have all the different kinds of email addresses and domain names. We'll look at that in the next slide. But whatever the different types of domain names and email addresses are, you can see some of them in my background as well. What you would want to do, or what you would want to have, is that all these domain names and email addresses should work in all the applications around the globe. So if I have my email address in my own language and I'm writing an email to you, you should be able to receive that email, and then you should be able to respond back to that email. Or you should also have a choice of having your email address in your own language and script. So that's generally easily, one would think it would be possible. It's certainly available, but as we will see that many different software applications still don't accept or support that technology. And that's what we want to solve for as far as universal acceptance of domain names and email addresses are concerned. And of course, there's a very good reason for doing it, right? It allows consumer choice. So if I want to choose to have a domain name in my own language and script, I should be able to do that. It improves competition and obviously provides broader access to end users, because there are many users out there who are not, for example, understand English or Latin writing system. There are many people out there who would like to use the internet and would do use the internet, but only use, can read and write in their own language and script. And so they should obviously have the ability to use the internet in that script and language. Um, so moving then on, uh, what we've just talked about is that there are all these now possibly different kinds of domain names and email addresses. And what I've done here is try to categorize them in different sets. So there are always these, because of the new GTLD program, there are all these new domain names, which like .sky, which are still 3 characters long, or 4 characters long, but they're new. They were not there before. But then we also get these email or domain names, which or top level domain names, which are very long. So we are more used to having domain names which are 2 or 3 or 4 characters long. The longest one in previously was 6 characters .museum. But now we have even longer top level domain names like .international, .technology, .engineering. And then as we also saw, we actually now have domain names, including top level domain names, all in local languages. And there is a Thai domain name example here. And then these different kinds of domain names can also, for example, be used to formulate different kinds of email addresses. So you can actually have so email address normally has 2 parts: the mailbox part, which is before the @ and then the domain name part, which is after the @. And so you can actually have the mailbox name, what is at the left hand of the @ in ASCII or in a local script. And then you can also have a domain name part of an email address, which is at the right of the @ in ASCII or as an internationalized domain name as well. So it creates multiple combinations. And obviously, if you're using or setting up mail servers or using a mail service, those servers or services should be able to, as a first step, send and receive emails to all such email addresses. And then as a second step, should be able to create such email addresses as well for you to use. I guess when we are looking at testing for universal acceptance readiness, we try to use all these different kinds of email addresses and domain names. And then I guess one would want to set the scope of this work. So as far as universal acceptance is concerned, we want to make sure that all these different kinds of domain names and email addresses are accepted by applications, are correctly validated by applications, are processed properly by applications, and stored and displayed properly by applications as well. So these are obviously what the expectation of UA readiness is. So let's look at where we are. So what we've been doing is this study of top 1,000 websites across the globe. We did one in 2017 and 2019. And in 2020, what we did was we did a country level survey. So we looked at not just generic global websites, but popular websites, popular 50 websites across 20 countries. So another 1,000 websites. But we wanted to see, how different kinds of domain names. And so on the left hand side, you can see I'm using, or we used some of the same different kinds of email addresses. What we did in this study was that we went to all these different websites and went to their contact us page. And normally at the contact us page, they ask for an email address. And what we did was, instead of we a regular ASCII email address, we put these different kinds of email addresses, and we were just checking whether that website contact us page would take that email address either in Arabic or in Chinese, or partially in Chinese, or with the new long or new short like .international or .sky email top level domains. Will they accept them as valid domain names, or sorry, email addresses or not? And they were all valid, so they were all functional email addresses. Um, what we found out was that for the new short, we get pretty good acceptance rates, and they've improved over time. So back in 2000, they were only at 90%, but now in 2020, we are close to 98%. Whereas .com and .org are email addresses using those kind of top level domains are accepted on 100% of the time. So that problem is getting solved. New long like .international or .engineering, there's still many websites which, for example, may put a check that top level domain cannot be more than 5 characters or 6 characters long. And so when they receive .international, they think that it is not a valid email address because the software code they're using is old, and it doesn't now realize that it is top level domains can be longer. So it actually rejects them for no good reason. So those we still found are accepted about 85% of the times, but rejected by 15% of the time. The challenge actually comes when you have email addresses, for example, totally in your own local language like Arabic or Chinese or any other script. And the 90%, so out of the 1,000 websites we checked, 900 websites rejected these email addresses, saying that these are invalid email addresses, even though they were valid email addresses. So that's obviously a problem which needs to be solved, because if you're not accepting these email addresses, you're not allowing all these different script language and script communities to engage properly on the internet. And that's obviously not a good thing. We also conducted a similar study where we were not looking at just the websites, which is just checking whether an email address is accepted, but we wanted to check whether the email addresses actually can be processed as well. So we actually sampled email servers across the globe, thousands of them, looking at their MX records in the zone files, and then pinged them to see whether they would support a Chinese email address or a Cyrillic email address. And we found that only 9.7%, less than 10% of the mail servers out there are configured even to consider receiving an email from such addresses. And they would just, if they receive more than 90% email servers, if they receive an email from a Chinese email address or Arabic email address, they would just reject it and send it back as invalid email address, and they would not even process it. So that's the state of affairs. And that's, of course, is not very good, but that's something which we all want to work together to address. When we start looking at the problem can be at many layers. It can be just applications not accepting an email address or a domain name at the application layer. So, for example, we have some popular social media applications which currently do not support internationalized domain names. If you type in the internationalized domain name, they display it as the ASCII A label format, which is not readable. It's supposed to be for the application internal use, not for end users. End users are supposed to see the U label or Unicode form of the label, which they can read in their own script. We found that even limitations down lower in the stack. So some programming languages, as we will see later in this presentation, do not support their libraries don't support IDNs or email addresses properly, they still only support, for example, ASCII domain names and email addresses. So if I'm building something using Java and Java itself is not supporting such domain names, and I'm using a particular library in Java which doesn't support these domain names and email addresses, then my application which uses that library is also not going to support it. So the problem can actually be deeper in the stack and not just in the application. Similarly, sometimes there are even standards which are not updated to address such cases. So when we need to resolve the universal acceptance problem, that problem needs to be resolved at multiple layers. Similarly, for on the email side, we have a similar problem. We obviously use an email ecosystem contains many different components. You have the user agents, submission agent, transfer agent, and delivery agent. We also have these other tools like your spam filters and calendars and address books. So all of those eventually would need to be able to process all these different kinds of email addresses properly. And if they cannot, then of course, for example, if an MTA or transfer agent does not support email addresses in your local language or script, then it will just bounce back that email and say that it is not a valid email address, even though it is. And that obviously is something which we want to resolve. So this thing needs to be handled both on the email side as well as the application development side, for example, for websites. One more question for you guys to think of. So to enhance systems to be UA ready, which of the following categories of domain names and email addresses are relevant? So what do you think? Does universal acceptance considerations for universal acceptance, are ASCII domain names relevant? Are IDNs relevant? Are internationalized email addresses relevant? Are all of them relevant? Or are only some of them relevant? So what do you think is the right answer?
You can type in the chat room, or you raise your hand if you want to speak.
So if you look at, let's see, this, you can potentially guess what an answer is. If you think about it, even in ASCII, the new short and the new long, like in .international, it doesn't get accepted all the times, right? Obviously internationalized domain names are relevant. Internationalized email addresses are relevant. But also ASCII domain names, in the sense that there are some ASCII domain names which are longer than usual. We've talked about .international, but you also have .africa, which is longer than usual. And if you're using .africa, you may even find that some applications won't accept it as a valid domain name or an email address if you're using that domain name with an email address. So actually the answer is 1, 2, and 3. So number 4, all of the above. All of them are relevant to some extent as far as universal acceptance challenge is concerned. Any questions? If not, then I think we should move forward. So now we're going to get into slightly technical details about basically what is needed from, and we'll look at it from two perspectives. We're going to look at it from a perspective of first programming languages, where what the challenges are, what is required for universal acceptance first, and then which languages, what kind of support is required for programming languages to achieve universal acceptance. And then the second part of it is we're going to look at email addresses and email technology and see what is needed from an email technology point of view for supporting EAI. So let's dive deeper. As discussed earlier, for internationalized domain names, also for internationalized email addresses, we are now using what is called Unicode encoding, because ASCII does not support all the different languages of the world. So we had to switch to Unicode, but then we now have this system, and we'll talk about this further, where we also use ASCII at the back and then Unicode at the front for the end users. So just to understand how Unicode works, Unicodes are normally encoded or shown as in the format it's normally a number. Each character is given a number. So for example, letter E is given 0065 in Unicode. F would be 0066 and so on. The letters in ASCII are basically represented as basically 0 through 127. So they're so the 127 characters. Obviously, Unicode has many more characters, so it requires a broader space. So let's move on. In the context of Unicode, the files or data is normally stored in what is called the UTF-8 format. Like in ASCII, normally we have the .txt format. Also, to note is that sometimes a character can be represented in more than one form in Unicode. So for example, if you look at this second bullet, you have this E with an accent. In Unicode, it is possible to represent this in two ways. One is 00E8, which is directly the E with accent encoded, or you could actually use the E and the combining mark together, which is the letter E 0065, and then combining mark is 0300. You can put them together and then you can still formulate that character. And so because the characters actually can be formed in two different ways, basically Unicode also provides what is referred to as the normalization forms, which allow different types of characters to be considered equivalent, so that they can be processed properly. And the Unicode, just give me a second. So in the normalized form, basically different forms are sort of mapped onto each other. So what happens is in normalization form C, what you get is the if you enter either 00E8 or 0065 followed by 0300, the output of the normalization form will be basically 00E8. So even if a character can be formed in 2 or 3 different ways using Unicode, the normalized form only gives a singular version. And that obviously helps in matching strings, for example, which can be formed in many different ways. So normalization obviously is an essential part of the process for Unicode processing. And the IDNA 2008 standard actually asks that all the strings for domain names should be in normalization form C or NFC form. So that's sort of a bit of an introduction to Unicode. Moving on and looking at domain names themselves. we already obviously have seen that we have domain names can be different labels, top level domains, second level domains, third level domains. You see an example here which has 4 different levels or labels. www as one label, example, and then co, and then uk, and uk is normally referred to as the top level domain. And initially we
Samak,
yeah.
there is a question in the chat room in French from Seram Adialpo, and when you answer, I think he'll get the response. He's asking, should preference be given to the usage of standardized characters? He's saying because encoding of special characters seems to be complicated. Like his question is referring to your previous slide.
Basically, all these are standard characters. So when we move on to Unicode, suddenly, as I discussed earlier, the space increases from just 63 characters to about 100,000 characters, which are allowed in IDNA 2008. Over time, what we've done is we are finding mechanisms to use them properly within domain name system, and that's what we help define based on community input through the root zone LGRs for the top level domains and reference LG label generation rules for the second level. So these are not non-standard encodings. These are standardized encodings. This is how Unicode works. But even within Unicode, there are multiple ways a character can be represented. And to address that, the normalization form actually is used, and that's also part of the IDNA 2008 standard specification. Basically, they say that take a Unicode string, first convert it into NFC form, and then use it for further processing. And there is obviously code available to do all this processing. So we have, for example, Unicode-based libraries, which can take an input string from a user and convert that to NFC form. So those are the kind of operations we would need to do for processing. I guess one would need to understand that this step, for example, the normalization step needs to be done as part of the processing of domain names, if you're, for example, designing a website or configuring an email server. So I hope that answers the question, Yawi, or?
I think so. If needed, please, you can raise your hand, ask the question in your languages, but feel free to raise your hand at any time or type the question in the chat room.
Right.
Thank you.
So I want to actually re-emphasize that by using IDNs, we are not saying that we are using non-standard encoding. We are actually using standard encoding. We are just expanding the scope from ASCII to all the different scripts and languages of the world. So moving on, now we have obviously longer top-level domain strings like engineering, Google, Africa, technology, as we saw. All these, and there are now new top-level domains available. Basically, you can go to the root zone database to see what is the latest set of top-level domains available. This keeps changing over time. So it's not really a fixed list of top-level domains, by the way. And that, as we will see later, is one of the problems. And in some cases, some code or some applications use what is normally referred to as a white list, is a fixed list of top-level domains or domain names, which they think are correct. And obviously that changes because root zone database is changing over time. So domain names, as we've also seen, can now be internationalized. If any one of the labels in a domain name contains one non-ASCII character, it is normally referred to as a internationalized domain name. It can be only one non-ASCII character, like the A in example.ca, or it could be entirely a complete character which is non-ASCII. For example, the Chinese domain name shared here. And basically domain names or internationalized domain names are formed using what is the internationalized domain name IDNA 2008 standard for IDNs. And please note that there was an IDNA 2003 version earlier, but it is not valid anymore. The version which needs to be used is IDNA 2008. And it's also one of the causes of an issue, because if you're using programming languages and you're using some libraries, you may find some libraries which say that they support IDNs, but they may actually be supporting the older version of IDNs, which is using IDNA 2003. So you want to make a note that even if something is saying that they're supporting IDNs, you want to make sure that they are actually supporting the IDNA 2008 standard and not the older version of the standard. So something to look for. Then going deeper into the domain names, we also basically have talked about this, that domain names are normally represented or should be represented in U-label format, meaning in Unicode, for humans to read in their own language and script. However, they need, internet obviously is still configured to process ASCII. So what happens is that there's a conversion mechanism, which is defined in RFC 3492, which takes a Unicode and converts that into a unique ASCII sequence, which is normally referred to an ASCII compatible encoding or A-label form. So U-label is normally, or Unicode version is used for humans, and A-label is normally used for processing internally. Basically, when you are developing websites, you need to also manage this. So for example, if you have to process or resolve or use an domain name in email addresses internally, you may want to convert input from the user into an A-label format by using code which is available through applications or libraries in different programming languages. But if you want to display that to the end user, you want to convert it back to the U-label format. So conversion from A-label to U-label and U-label to A-label is it's a one-to-one conversion, and there are two ASCII and two Unicode functions which are generally available in languages which you can use for those conversions. One additional thing to do when you're converting from U-label format to A-label format is that once you convert U-label to an ASCII format, it is it would be hard to determine whether that ASCII label is actually an ASCII label or actually a A-label, which is a equivalent of a U-label. So to make that explicit, what the standard says is that you append xn hyphen hyphen before the ASCII string which has been converted to create an A label. So if you look at this number 3 in the first bullet, you start with the label example which has A with a caret on it. When you convert that to an Unicode, which is the ASCII version of that label, you get exmple-xta. That's, you don't need to worry about how that's created. That's just the algorithm which is defined in RFC 3492, and you can actually just use a Unicode converter to convert the Unicode string into an ASCII equivalent string. And then to create an A label out of it, what you need to do is append or prefix it with the xn hyphen hyphen. And that creates the equivalent A label for the U label, for example. And similarly, I've shown a similar thing for the Chinese label in the next example. And you can see that, again, we first convert to an ASCII compatible string, which is just a random sequence of ASCII characters. And then we append that with xn dash dash to create it into a an A label against the U label. So that's how the IDNs work. There are two forms: U label form for humans and A label form for internal processing. And the A label
Simon,
form
a question.
has accent dash
For
dash.
the Chinese one, you have the dash 4 times?
Yes, because the conversion to ASCII already created 2 dashes as part of the conversion. And when we add accent dash dash in front of it, it just automatically creates that sequence. So basically, we are taking the Punicode, which is the conversion from Unicode into the ASCII form, and then attaching accent dash dash in front of it, whatever the Punicode is. Does that clarify?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, so then, so that's domain names. Let's look at the email addresses. So for email addresses, we've actually already talked about that email address is composed of 2 parts: the mailbox name part, before the @ and the domain name part after the @. We've already talked about the domain name part, which is after the @, so we're not going to repeat that. So all the rules we've talked about domain names apply here as well. For the mailbox name, initially in the earlier versions of emails, we are used to using mailbox names mostly in ASCII. But now it is with new standards and new protocols, it is now possible to have the mailbox name in Unicode format as well. And in that case, it is entirely used in UTF-8 format, right? So there is only one form, UTF-8 form, in which the mailbox name is formed in local languages. So for example, it is possible to have email addresses now which can have, as you can see, the first one, you can have Kevin with an E with an accent. So it is actually an IDN. And the domain name part is just plain ASCII. Or you can have something like a completely Chinese or a Japanese or a Korean or a, Arabic email address. And there is one example given here. So that's how basically these are formed. So what are some of the issues which we currently see? One issue which we currently see is that in many websites, for example, or applications, people were obviously 10 years ago or 15 years ago or even earlier, when these libraries and programming languages were being developed, top level domains were normally just between 2 characters, 3 characters, maybe 4 characters. Maximum we've seen was 6 characters for .museum. So basically what people were doing was, in their code, they were saying that, since these things are just 2, 3, 4 characters, why don't I put a check on the top level domain when I'm entering an IDN on my website? And that will help me, filter out anybody who's putting in any garbage in the text box. So what they did was they put in a check that the top level domain can only be between 2 to 4 characters. And of course, that's no longer true, as we saw. You can have .africa or .international. So if somebody still has that check, or somebody is using old piece of code in their new application, reusing that code without really knowing, I guess better, they would create a potential problem that their application will start rejecting domain names which are valid, but because their TLDs are longer than 4 characters. Another problem which people were doing was that, as I was sharing earlier, some applications use what is called a whitelist. So what they do is they hard code a list of domain top level domains. So you may actually have a list of the original 22 or so top level domains like .com, .in, .org, .net, .info, and so on. But now, the domain names are not limited to those 22 GTLDs, right? We now have more than 1,200 generic top level domains, in addition to the country codes, which are 2 letters. So if you're using a static list, that is not going to work, because every, there can be more top level domains added or removed from the root zone database. So you want to make sure that you have the latest list and not a fixed list. And then obviously there are applications which are making sure that they're only checking for ASCII characters. And that of course is no longer valid, because now we can input Unicode characters as well to allow for different languages and scripts in the world. So that's an issue. Those are issues with domain names. Similarly, issues for email addresses is that first of all, of course, email addresses, some email tools are expecting ASCII domain name part, and they're also expecting ASCII mailbox name part. And if they get a non-ASCII domain name part or a non-ASCII Unicode type email part, they will stop working. They will think that they are invalid email addresses, whereas those are perfectly valid email addresses now. So those are some of the, and many of these are still currently deployed. So it's not something which is as we see, one of the reasons why they are using a top level, if you saw Arabic and Chinese, out of 1,000 websites, 900 websites are rejecting them as invalid email addresses. The reason they're rejecting is because they have maybe one of these checks put in either on domain names or email addresses. And because of that, it's old code they're using, and they are unable to detect the new forms of domain names and email addresses. And that's obviously what needs to be fixed. So what we've done through a community-based effort, which is, so at ICANN, we've organized, or communities organized itself. They call it the group Universal Acceptance Steering Group. And they're working on determining what are the issues and what are the possible solutions and how to outreach to the community to address this problem. And one of the documents they've produced is a framework for UA readiness testing, which can be used by developers across the globe to see whether their applications are UA ready or not. And what they do is provide some basic test cases which any developer can use to test their applications for accepting, validating, processing, storing, and displaying the domain names and email addresses. So I would invite you to take a closer look at that document to see how you can actually make your own applications UA ready. So this is, we're not going to get into, there's some deeper level of details here. I don't think I want to go into these details. I've still included the slides in case you want to refer back to them. But if, we have a few slides which tell about how to deal with the checking of these domain names and email addresses. You could read through these slides maybe at a later time, but again, we are not going to get into all these details. So let me skip a few of these slides, so they're actually going into details of specific details of how to check for domain names first and then email addresses. I think one of the things which I do want to point out is that many of these websites then use what is normally called a regular expression. These are these expressions which I've shared in the blue color here. They sometimes are hard coding. For example, this particular regular expression which checks for a valid email address is hard coding, saying that email addresses only contain letters A through Z, digits, and hyphen, and maybe some symbols. And if you look here towards the right, it says that the top level domain can be between 2 to 7 characters long. So these are obviously not allowing for non-ASCII characters and not allowing for longer top level domains and so on. So it is unfortunately not quite valid. So I think the moral of the story is that when you're reusing code, make sure that you use the code which can support the latest version of IDN and email address protocols, and don't reuse the older code, much of which is actually not very friendly for local language and script, and even longer ASCII domain names and email addresses composed of those domain names. What we've also done is we've actually set up a test bed, and I would really encourage you to go and look at this document. What we've done is we've actually enabled domain names and email addresses in 28 different scripts. So whichever script you're using, whether you're using Ethiopic or Tibetan or Lao or Khmer or Chinese, you will find a domain name and email address in this document, which you can use for testing. So for example, and what the email addresses here are configured so that you can, if you send an email to this email address, any of these email addresses in this document, you should get an auto response back. And if you do not get an auto response back, it means that somewhere the whole chain is broken. And that, of course, is a problem. So you would need to then check your mail servers to see what the problem is. If your email is compatible and supports EAI, you should get an auto response back from any of these email addresses which are listed. And also all the domain names in this document should resolve to a page which tells, so all these are functioning domain names and email addresses in all the different languages and scripts. Some of the examples are given in my background. So you can use them to check your own systems. So we've also been looking at these domain names and these different libraries which are used to develop applications in different programming languages. And as you'll see that, many programming languages do support IDNs and internationalized email addresses properly. But there are many other libraries which don't. So if you look at the last column, it says the type. So that type, the library, that's the library for either IDNs or email. And you would, it gives the name of the library for that language as well. So if you look at Python 3, and you want to configure mailing in Python 3, you may want to use the email validator library, but you should not use the Django auth library, because Django auth library doesn't support EAI email addresses, but email validator does. Similarly, if you could use SMTP lib as well in Python 3, which also supports a mail. So whichever programming language or platform you're using, this document provides you with some insight on which particular libraries are good to use and which are probably not good to use when you're considering universal acceptance issues. And this is just a summary of our work or discussion so far. So, we need to understand that automatically there is no complete support for UA. We need to be careful on which libraries and frameworks we're using. We need to make sure that even while using those libraries, we need to make sure that we are normalizing our software strings, and we are making sure that we are using A-level, U-level conversions and all the necessary requirements for encoding or processing for universal acceptance. And then always make sure that you test your systems before you launch them. And we have a testing framework as well as test cases available for you through the 2 documents I have shared. All right, so let me stop here for a minute, see if you have any questions before we move on to the email part.
You can raise your hand or you type the question in the chat room. We have less than 20 minutes to the end of the workshop, but I think you will still have some minutes before the end. Thank you, Samad.
Thank you. So let's move on. So I'd like all of you to do this a short exercise. Hold on, let me uh, copy this link in the chat. So if you go to this link and type in your email address, and this utility should tell you whether your mail server is currently configured to receive an email address from like Chinese email address or Arabic email address or one of the other email addresses. Maybe a good exercise to do. And if you have a Gmail address, you should get a green response that it supports EAI. But if you can use Gmail to test, but if you have a non-Gmail address, that's more interesting. So type that in to see whether your mail server does support EAI or not. So, you take a minute, go to this website, type in your address, email address, non-Gmail one if possible, and see what result you get, and maybe share that result in the chat so that we know whether your email address, for example, is supporting the
Samad, I think you are
non-ASCII.
saying preferably if you have an email address, and we have also an email address from our organization, I think you are recommending that you test also, or preferably the one from our organization. I think this is what we are saying. Thank you.
Yes, and not use the Gmail one. Gmail one works because Google already supports sending and receiving emails, for example, from Chinese or Arabic. So if I have a Chinese email address and I email you on your Gmail address, you will receive it, and you can respond back to it as well. And you can put in your Gmail address here, and it will say that it supports EAI. But the question is whether your organization's email address supports EAI or not. And if not, then maybe you should also talk to your organization and ask your IT team to support EAI so that you can get emails from people across the world, not just those using ASCII email.
So, Mr. Saidu, what was the response from the test? Mr. Saidu.
So if it's a G Suite or Google address, then it should say that it is good, right? Did it say it works?
So, Mr. Saidu, I think you are saying that, as Samad mentioned, it should be working. So you didn't test. This is my understanding. So for those who are not using like Gmail and others and using the email from your organization, can you share some results in the chat, please? Unless we are all using G Suite or Gmail or please, can you just type your email address in the chat if you don't mind? I think people will not bombard you if you are comfortable in doing that. Yeah, the result, how to share the result. You type, yes, that is from the NRI facilitator. That is one of the results. EAI is supported. So Mart, Yahoo, Sarmat, is Yahoo also ready? Because we have an email address from Yahoo.
Sure, if that's what it says, then it is ready. Right? It's supporting sending and receiving.
No, Mart is sharing the email address. So Mart, did you try that in the with the URL and then share the results with us, Mart? So type this email address using the website EAI.check, the website that was shared by Samad, and then share the result with us. So this is the test we want us to do. So you use that website, and then you check your email address. So we have Saidu also. .bf. So we see a system ending with .bf, and from Mr. Seidu, and EAI is supported. So that is what somebody is saying, that the email system
that
is
may be using G Suite. I think that was what Seidu was saying, that at the back it's using Gmail.
Exact. Okay, thank you, Sama. So any other response to share? We have less than 10 minutes to the end of the workshop.
So let me continue, and then we'll take a few more questions towards the end. So let's go through very quickly on the email side. So as you can probably tell that normal ASCII email servers won't really work. But for email addresses in Chinese or Arabic to be supported, both SMTP, POP, IMAP, all these services need to be enhanced, and they need to support what is normally the SMTP flag is used when you're exchanging emails between different servers like MUA, MSA, and MTA. But in the case of these Chinese or Arabic or Cyrillic email addresses, non ASCII email addresses, you need a special signaling flag. It is called SMTP UTF-8, and basically it says that UTF-8 version of email addresses or Unicode version of email addresses need to be supported, and all the different components of email systems need to be enhanced to address or to be able to process UTF-8 or Unicode. So, for example, when an email is being sent from a sender to a receiver, basically it goes through multiple user agents, submission agents, transfer agents, and delivery agents. And whenever it is hopping from one node to another node, there's actually a communication which goes through. And what's listed here is part of that communication. So as you will see is that when the sender is sending an email to the next receiver, in this case, both are MTAs, it sends a e-hello, it connects and sends a e-hello command. And against the e-hello, the receiver actually has to send back some parameters. And for the email to work properly in Chinese or Arabic in any other language, EAI support or email address internationalization to work, the receiver must send back a SMTP UTF-8 flag back to the sender. That way, sender knows that the receiver can support EAI or a Chinese email address, for example. And then based on that, the sender can then sends the Chinese email address tagged with SMTP UTF-8 saying that this is an email address, it's a from address, and it is in Unicode format. And so basically that communication needs to take place. If the receiver is not properly configured to receive non-ASCII email addresses, it will not send the SMTP UTF-8 flag back. And in that case, the email will get bounced back. So, and then obviously, if the handshake is good, then the email proceeds and the sender sends obviously the rest of the data to the receiver, and eventually the email is handed over. So to send the email from one end to another, from a sender to receiver, you would note that this process gets repeated from each node to the next node. And even if one node in the entire chain does not support non-ASCII email addresses, the chain breaks and the email gets bounced back. So the challenge is that not only your email server should be working, but all the email servers in the chain, including the receiver's email server, should also work for the whole thing to work from end to end. If there is only even a single node in this whole chain, which means your mail server, maybe your ISP in the middle, and then the receiver's ISP, other mail servers on the receiver's end, if all of them need to be configured right, and if there is any problem, then we'll see an issue. And so that's what we need to um, solve for. And if even a single uh, email system is or email node is not configured, your email will get bounced back and you will get a bounce receipt. There are also some other considerations for email addresses. So for example, in our ASCII case, uppercase and lowercase are automatically converted. For example, Peter uppercase and Peter lowercase, but that's not the case in non-ASCII email addresses. So for example, if you are using uppercase versus lowercase in non-ASCII email addresses, then you will need to make sure that you configure all the different versions of the mailboxes to make sure that they work and deliver mail in uppercase and lowercase. Spam, obviously, also some spam filters need to be configured properly. Other email services, obviously, which you're using, all you need to make sure that everything you're using is properly explicitly configured to support non-ASCII email addresses. And we also looked at some of the different tools which are available for email addresses. They could be mail services, or they can be MTAs, MSAs, and you can see that many of them are now supporting internationalized email address, but there are some which are not. So when you're configuring and installing them as part of your mail service, please make sure that you use tools and they're configured properly to support non-ASCII email addresses as well. And you're not using basically older technology which only supports ASCII. So, I guess question to ask is that, is your own software UA ready? And I think as part of the community, all of us need to make our own systems UA ready for UA to work. I need to make my email servers and my websites UA ready. You would need to make your email servers and your websites UA ready for all this to work for everyone. The work we've been doing at ICANN, we've been making our systems UA ready as well, and we've taken it through 3 stages. And the first simplest stage, we made sure that all the ASCII short and long like .sty and .international are handled. In the second phase, we said that IDNs should be handled at least in the A label or ASCII format, and then also in the U label or Unicode format. And then finally, we are now currently working, we're already done with stage 1 and 2 mostly. And we are now at stage 3, where we are also now configuring our mail servers to support non-ASCII email servers as well. And there's a case study on ICANN's work, which was published by Universal Acceptance Steering Group as well. So you can go and look at that for more details. So, this is, as you can see, a community. It requires larger community-based effort. We all need to participate in this process. So we would actually, request you to get involved, raise awareness of this technical problem as a first step. Talk to other people, tell them about this issue. More awareness obviously will result in eventually more systems being ready. Make sure you at least make your own systems UA ready, and then also advocate to others, public sector, other organizations to make their systems UA ready. We obviously also do all these outreach activities. We support the community. We actually have what are called local initiatives and UA ambassadors in different countries, regions. So if you want to get more involved in this part of the work, please connect with Yaovi or me. Or anyone as ICANN, and show your interest. Let us know if you're interested to be a UA ambassador in the region, or start a local initiative to do work and promote UA in the region, in your region. There's many different relevant materials, technical reports, which are being published. They're available at the uasg.tech website. You can go and see a complete list there. I've listed a few relevant ones here. And you can connect us at any time by emailing us at info@usg.tech or uaprogram@icann.org. We actually have a multiple discussion groups as well. So in the last row, last bullet, you'll see that we actually have multiple working groups which focus on either EAI or technology applications or communication. So if you want to get more involved with the ICANN working groups or ICANN supported work led by the Universal Acceptance Steering Group and their working groups, please sign up here and get involved. It would be great to get more people involved from Africa. And let me stop here and hand it back to you, Yawi.
Thank you very much, Samad, and thank you all for staying till the end of the hour. We just have 1 minute left, and if someone has a last question to ask, you can raise your hand. I want to again emphasize on the last slide on the screen now. You have Samad email on the last one, which is samad.hussein@icann.org. Please, we hope to get feedback from you, and you have in the previous slide many links to get more information. We really hope that you will take some actions at your control level within your organization, especially if you have an email system with your organization's domain name. Please try to test that. We want to thank again the organizers.
Yawi, we have a hand up by Mark.
We have a hand up, yes. We can give the floor with the permission from the interpreters. Mark, please go ahead. Mark, you can speak, please. Mark, your microphone is muted.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been educative and enlightening, and thank you for bringing this workshop. We want to know what you advise us to do at West African level, and how do we communicate this to our stakeholders? One or two things that you want to advise, and it's very, very technical. You can see the number of people that are attending there is highly technical. So can this be another? There can be some other technical programs or education or training that you can do for us at the West African level. Thank you.
Samad?
Yawi,
Thank you.
I can go first quickly, then hand it over to you. We do, within Universal Acceptance Steering Group, we have a couple of mechanisms. You can organize the community as a local initiative, and we can support you in that process. That's one way. And we have local initiatives, for example, in India, in China. There's a regional local initiative in Eastern Europe, which has 7 different countries participating together, reaching out to their community. So you can actually start a local initiative in your region, either at national level or at a regional level with multiple countries. The other option, of course, if you're an individual, you can contribute in the capacity of a UA ambassador. We already have 3 ambassadors in Africa who are contributing. We also organize trainings, technical training. If you want to host something, we can provide technical training on a platform, for example, at a university or some other option. So the options are there. If you want to contribute, let us know, reach out to us and discuss. And Yawi, would you like to add anything else?
Yes, again, it is technical, but we all have something to do. We have our part to play. The simple thing we can do is we use again the test address, the address we use during the the workshop. So we use this address, share this address with people, the one we use for the test. So anyone who is using a website, share the address with that person. Ask the person to do the test. If the response is not ready, so this person doing the test should contact the person in charge of the email system. So this is something in action, in addition to what Samar said. So please let us do that. Let us share this link. So if it's not working, talk to the technical person of the email system or get back to us, and then we'll help your team or your organization to make the email system compliant. If not, you have a good website, someone sending you an email or responding to a bid from like a governmental organization using his email address, like another script than the Latin one, you may not get the email address or this good proposal for that person. This is the answer I want to provide in addition. Thank you. So we can hand over to the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next session from 11 to 12 will soon start, and please, you are encouraged to join any of the rooms. They're available. Go to WAF/shared and join, please.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.